whether you're thriving is far more correlated to how you treat other people than how you are treated. And it is basically, it's entirely related in some ways to kindness. And I think many leaders don't recognize how much of an incubator for motivation, for connection, for emotional well-being, even physical well-being in their workplace or in their ministry or whatever it is that they're doing. They don't realize how incubating a culture of kindness is absolutely essential for accomplishing the things that they're hoping to accomplish in the way that they're hoping to accomplish them.
Welcome to Flourishing Leadership in Tough Times, where we have honest conversations to help you stay rooted with integrity, rise with courage, and lead with hopeful resilience. Hosted by Deborah Owen. Hello, friend. Welcome to another episode of Flourishing Leadership in Tough Times. Today, I'm very excited to introduce you to Shaunti Feldhahn, who is a Harvard-trained social researcher, best-selling author, and internationally recognized speaker whose work focuses on uncovering what actually helps people thrive in relationships, leadership, and everyday life. After beginning her career on Wall Street and Capitol Hill, Shaunti turned her attention to research, combining rigorous data analysis with practical application to help people understand what drives emotional connection, trust, and well-being. She's the author of several best-selling books, including For Women Only and The Kindness Challenge, which have impacted millions of readers worldwide. And I've used The Kindness Challenge with some of my own clients, which is terrific. And through her research and writing, Shaunti has become known for translating complex data into simple, life-giving insights, especially around how small, intentional shifts in how we treat one another can transform relationships, workplaces, and communities. Shaunti, I'm really grateful that you're here. Thank you so much.
Oh, I'm thrilled to be with you. Thank
This
you
is
for
great.
inviting me.
Yeah. Well, your work sits at such an important intersection. Rigorous research, but also deeply practical. It's helping people understand what actually makes relationships and environments flourish. And one of the things I appreciate is that you don't just deal in theory, you're uncovering patterns that really affect how people experience everyday life, whether at work, at home, or in their leadership. So to start us off, let's go back just a little bit. What first drew you into this work?
Well, I wish I could say I had the 10-step plan and that I implemented it perfectly. No, this ended up being one of those crazy right-hand turns that I realized was necessary, and that the experience that I had received would kind of funnel me into, and I'd be able to do it. So basically what happened is I had gotten an analytical graduate degree from Harvard. It's called a Master in Public Policy with a concentration in business, which is a fancy way of saying any analysis, operations, etc., on anything that is sort of business-like in the public interest, kind of.
Okay.
And then I went to work on Wall Street, and those two experiences really built up a kind of a base of analytical and research experience, digging out what are the things that really matter from a practical standpoint. It just happened to be in the financial arena with large Japanese banks and Chinese banks,
Okay.
which is what I was analyzing. I didn't realize that that was building up a skill set that was going to be used in a completely different way a few years down the road.
Right.
The way that this all started, if you want to know the real story,
Sure.
is that I actually, when my husband Jeff and I moved from New York City to Atlanta, which is still where we live today, it's a long story, but I had a chance to write a couple of novels. And one of the main characters in this novel that I was writing was a man. And I realized I didn't know how to put thoughts in his head. Like, I couldn't just say what my main character was doing. I had to say what the guy was thinking. But I'm like, I don't know. Like, What would a guy be thinking? So this whole thing started because I would ask Jeff, my husband, or if we'd be out to dinner with another couple, I'd go to the other guy and I'd be like, can I interview you? And I'd say, here's the scene in the novel. What would you be thinking if this was you? So that was it from my perspective. But as they started telling me what they'd actually be thinking, I just found myself like shocked half the time. I'm like, I've been married at that point 8 years. Like, why haven't I heard this before? And I realized as I did more and more of these conversations, I was hearing stuff that was really, really foundational for relationships. And it was stuff that isn't affecting us, like once every month or two, it comes up. It's like, no, this was things that these men were describing that they thought and they felt every single day, multiple times a day. So this was a fairly big deal. And so another long story, but I ended up being able to do this large nationally representative survey of men in order to try to figure out, like, is this accurate or not? And when I got the data back, it was like, wow, I didn't just interview the 100 weirdest men on the planet. Like this, this is pretty common. Now, not universal, right? If 75% of men said one way, 25% didn't, right?
Okay.
Everybody's an individual. But I realized, whoa, this is stuff that women need to know. I end up writing this book for women only based on that survey, and it exploded. And that led to, okay, hey, we need to do for men only to help men understand women. And then started working in the workplace and with parenting and leadership and all these other things. But that first thing was how I got started.
Wow, that's fascinating. It was very accidental, and
Very.
you were just so struck by the differences between what you
Yes.
thought they might think and then what they were actually thinking.
Yes. Well, one of the things that was very, very clear early on was that there was a lot of misunderstanding. There was a lot of assumptions that we kind of have to knock down in our personal, and it turns out in our workplace relationships as well. We just, we live in our brain. I'm a woman. My brain wiring is different than a man's brain would be. It's pretty significantly different in some cases, actually.
Mhm.
And so I have certain assumptions about how things should work. And he has different assumptions because his brain works differently. And of course,
Mhm.
then there's personality and all the other things. But
Mhm.
we were pretty strict. As I was going through the analysis, I zeroed out, I accounted for anything that changed by age or racial background or religious background, socioeconomic background, geography. Like basically, if black men answer different than white men, there's something other than men going on.
Mhm.
And so I really wanted that universal stuff. So that's, I think, one of the reasons it hit such a nerve is that we were narrowing it down just to the stuff that we tend not to get about each other.
Wow. And so, I know it's in the books. I did not get a chance to read those books. I've read your other one. But if there were one or two things that you would encourage our listeners and viewers to pay attention to, I
Hmm.
mean, if you don't, is there something kind of in general that is something that we should pay attention to? In other words, if we're having a conversation with someone of the opposite gender, what should we be paying attention to?
Well, from a leadership perspective, because there's slightly different things when you're talking about it from a personal perspective, but
Mm.
from a leadership perspective, actually there is one big, huge thing that we urge everybody to start at least having a radar up for, like have
Mhm.
their antenna up to
Mhm.
notice this.
Mhm.
And that is when you are working with if you're a man, you're working with a woman working with a man, you're working with the opposite sex, you don't think of it this way, but you're basically working with a foreign culture. And so
Okay.
I mean, I got myself into all sorts of trouble.
Hi, thank you for letting me interrupt this episode for just a moment. Now, if you're listening to this podcast, the chances are you care deeply about leading well, especially in times that feel heavy or uncertain or demanding. One of the convictions behind this podcast is that flourishing leadership doesn't start with strategy. It starts with who you're becoming as a leader, under pressure, in grief or sorrow, in change or transformation. And that's why I've been writing a series of devotional books called The Awaiting for Advent and When Sorrow Speaks for Lent. They're grounded in neuroscience, the personality patterns of the Enneagram, and reflective practice to help you grow in awareness, self-honesty, and presence. And while they do follow the rhythms of the church year, they're really for any season when leadership feels costly. They're resources you can return to whenever you want to lead from the inside out. Not just do more or say more, but become more of who you were created to be, more grounded, more whole. So please see the show notes for links to these resources and share them with your friends. Thanks, and now back to this episode.
When I first started on Wall Street, my job was working with large Japanese banks, as I said, and I made every mistake in the book. Like I thought I was pretty smart, and apparently I was really dumb because there were things that I came in intending to set a certain stage. I was usually the only woman at the table because, finance is 80-20, 80% men usually. And I was always the only American at the table in a room full of, senior Japanese bankers and other leaders. And I would, for example, pass out my business card and, be very casual about it, the way that you tend to in American environments, because it puts us all on the same stage. It says we're all equal. We're going to handle this casually. I'm not coming in and, throwing my weight around. Well, for anyone who has ever done any work with Asia, you're wincing right now because you know that in Asian context, the presentation of the business card is a ceremony. And it's a very particular thing where you hold the card by two fingers and you examine it, you take it and you examine it very carefully. And you're like, yes. Okay. So like it takes a long time to meet anybody, but then you bow and then you move to the next person in line. When I was casually handing out my card, taking their card, going thanks and putting it sometimes in a pocket, like, whoa, I didn't realize I'm stomping in with my big cowboy boots and saying, I'm in charge. You're not. I don't care about what you have to say. I'm running this meeting.
Okay.
Not at all the message that I wanted to send or that I even was aware that I was sending.
Yeah.
That's a silly example, but we do that same thing when we are working with the opposite sex because we don't realize it, but we have these expectations of how things should work based on how we perceive them. And we don't realize that there's kind of unwritten rules that are pretty common to the opposite sex that are based on, again, our brain wiring, and some is socialization and all that kind of stuff. But that's to me one of the big, like, starting points for people to be aware of. Have your antenna up for that kind of cross-cultural conversation.
Cross-cultural. Yeah, that's great. That's great. And so I know this is a leadership podcast, and yet every interaction that we have with another human being is a personal interaction.
Correct.
So is there, and you said there would be a little bit different, but what are some of those differences between like interpersonal attention, paying attention and versus leadership and having a specific role paying attention?
So let me give you an example of where I'm going to answer that with where is there crossover? Because
Okay,
that's the
good.
easiest thing. Like what
Sure.
matters to both
Right.
arenas, right? One of the things, for example, and I'll just talk about it from the women's side because that's me.
Hmm.
But one of the things that a lot of us as women don't realize is that statistically, it's somewhere between 75 and 85% of men, depending on which survey and which instrument and how the question was asked and all that. But a pretty large majority of men, it turns out, look very confident, very together. You know, if you're talking about in a personal standpoint, very strong, right? And we don't realize that under the surface, there is an immense amount of self-doubt. They look confident, but it's a mask. And it's essentially, and that's the same way at home. You might think, well, of course they put on a mask at work. No, it's the exact same way at home,
Oh,
where basically there is this deep question, this insecurity that's essentially saying, am I any good at what I do? And somebody's going to find out that I have no idea what I'm doing, which is, you know, even like the most impressive, accomplished CEO. I've interviewed many of those individuals. And one of them told me he was this award-winning CEO. Long story how I came across him on an airplane because I tend to interview whoever is sitting next to me on the airplane. But he ended up telling me, he's like, oh yeah, like I sit in my big office and, you know, on the top of a skyscraper and with my huge desk. And he's like, I'm convinced my fourth grade teacher is going to walk in the door and go, what are you doing here? And one
interesting.
of the things that we need to recognize, this is just one example, at home, in the workplace, in a leadership environment, is that for many men, again, not 100%, but it was that pretty large majority, that insecurity, that question, it's kind of like a raw nerve. And you can hit it without recognizing that that's what you're doing. Hence the cross-cultural awareness that
Yeah.
we need to have.
Okay.
Because in general, we women, we don't walk around with a question of somebody's going to figure out that I don't know what I'm doing. Like, no, I think I know what I'm doing, thanks. But that it just turns out that we have our own insecurities. That just doesn't tend to be one of them statistically in the same way.
That's great. I think that's really helpful in many situations, both at home and at work. Obviously, to be aware that not everything that somebody says is the truth. They're feeling something differently because they need to have this
Yep.
persona, as Jung would say, right? They need to have this persona of I'm okay and I'm good at what I do, even if I don't really feel that way underneath.
Yep. It's the raw nerve. It turns into, we should say, it turns into a raw nerve.
Yeah.
And we just don't recognize it. I'll give you just one example of this is something again that pretty much the same across the data and the surveys of men in the workplace and at home and across all the surveys that we've done over now the last 20 whatever 22 years pretty consistently. For example, if you're trying to figure out what can hit that raw nerve in the colleague that you're working with, for example, anytime you say the words, why did you do that? Okay, like you're in a meeting. Bob is standing at the whiteboard explaining the pricing for the new product. And you raise your hand and you say, "Hey Bob, why did you choose that pricing?" You are literally just asking for information, right? It's the same way at home. Like, why did you allow the kids outside without their coats on? You're just asking for information. That's it. There's no judgment, there's no accusation. It's just I don't understand. But the Bobs of the world, because of that secret, hidden, often under the surface, insecurity, raw nerve, you've just hit the nerve, and he's answering the question, but inside he's going, I cannot believe she just challenged me in front of the whole team.
Right. I could see
You're
that
just asking
coming.
for information. He doesn't hear it that way.
Hmm.
Again, cross-cultural issues.
Yeah.
And so it makes all the difference in the world if you watch, like, seriously, if you watch how many men ask that question of each other, they will often say, instead of, hey, why did you choose that pricing? They'll say, hey, Bob, I know you've been working on this for a while. You've got a couple of reasons for the different things you've done. Help me understand what was the reason for choosing that pricing? And it's basically like you have a reason. I'm not there yet. Help me work it through. And it's the same way at home.
Hmm.
You know, hey, honey, I know you saw that the kids came in with like purple fingers. What was the reason why you let them outside without their coats?
Right.
And you might hear this like long string of reasoning that you never would have heard if you would have, in his mind, shut him down by asking in his mind, a critical question.
Yeah, I love that. And even the word why, most as coaches, we're told, don't ask the word why, ask the question why, because it can put somebody on the defensive so
Yeah.
quickly and easily. But I really like that frame of help me understand.
Yeah. And here's the thing that I have to say out loud for any woman leader listening to this,
Yeah.
because man, I had to do a lot of rethinking once I started seeing the data coming back.
Hmm.
We have been told in maybe prior years, prior generations more often, but still today, we have been told, oh, you never ask, help me understand, I'm not there yet. You ever, no, because that makes you sound like you don't get it. It's like, can we please stop overthinking this?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
instead, just figure out how to respond to one another in a way that they hear whatever we're asking in the way that we're asking it, and
Hmm.
not that they're hearing something we're not even asking.
Yeah, that's a good frame. Thank you for clarifying all of that. And so that actually kind of leads to my next question, which is all of this research that you've been doing over all these years has shown that small behaviors can have a really big impact.
Yeah.
So, why do those small shifts matter so much, regardless of whether it's gender issues or age issues or whatever it might be? Why do those small shifts matter so much?
So one of the things that we've seen again, in the data over all these studies is that in general, now this is not universal, but in general, we tend to operate with kind of assumption building on assumption building on assumption in our lives about how things work. So again, using the gender, this is just one of many examples, but
Hmm.
since we were just talking about it, you're a middle school girl, a boy does something and you're like, why are boys so weird? Why did he do that? Oh, I bet it was because of this. So now you've got a building block in your head of, oh, this is how boys are. This is how boys think. And then the next building block goes on top of that. And then the next one and the next one. And you don't realize that, oh, I've got assumption on assumption. And some of those assumptions are wrong.
Hmm.
And so there is a need to go all the way back and be like, okay, what is actually accurate here? And maybe because on top of the assumptions, I've built habits. And usually these are not big, huge issues. Like the why did you? The only thing that you really need to know that goes underneath that is that men tend to look confident and strong. And on the inside, there's a lot of doubting themselves.
Hmm.
And that's like a raw nerve. Okay, got it. It's a big thing to them, but it's a fairly like simple thing
Hmm.
to keep in mind as you're talking to your partner, as you're talking to your colleague, as you're talking to your son.
Hmm.
That's an example of, yeah, that's small, but wow, it debunks a bunch of assumptions. He is strong, he's confident, he needs to be taken down a peg or two, he thinks he's all that. That is a small shift, and poof, it has a big impact.
Yeah, yeah. Because it shifts the relationship and it shifts the way he thinks about himself, but also how he thinks about you,
For
and then
sure.
also how you think about him in relation to you. So there, I mean, it's if we're looking at all the connections, yeah, the small shift can make a really big difference. Yeah.
Yeah, the analogy I heard somewhere, you've probably heard this a million times at some leadership event. I do a lot of women's leadership events and training and that kind of thing. And I was at a conference where they were using the fighter jet analogy. You've probably heard this,
I'm not sure.
where it's a great little mental word picture. It kind of it's essentially just saying, okay, if a fighter jet, going incredibly fast across the continent, if the fighter jet is on target on a straight course and it gets there in, gets from Atlanta, where I live, to, let's just say, San Diego in an hour and a half or whatever it is. Well, suppose that it just got it 1% wrong or 0.5% wrong. Pretty soon, it's ended up in the Arctic,
Yeah,
actually,
completely
um, be-
different.
because you're moving really fast in
Yeah.
just slightly the wrong direction.
Hmm.
And that is a little bit of what this is like. All these little factors, if we can sort of right size them, if we can kind of get a sense of, no, this is actually how this works, or this is how people actually think. Let me debunk a couple of mythologies I have in my mind that I don't even realize I have right now. And then suddenly, oh, wow, this works a whole lot better. I end up in San Diego. I end up where I was hoping to go, right?
Okay, okay.
So
Yeah.
it's that
So,
kind of idea.
yeah, thinking about what the goal is and making sure that you're not slightly off in terms of how you get there. So that's actually a really good analogy. I like that.
Yeah.
Let me shift the conversation just a little bit. So, what are what are some of the most common things? I mean, you're talking about changing assumptions. What are some of the most common things that leaders might get wrong about motivation, connection, or emotional well-being, either for themselves
Hmm.
or for somebody else?
Probably. So, what we've seen in the data of a couple of our studies. Now, by the way, we haven't studied everything under the sun. So, there's plenty of things that I would be like, let me do a 2-year study and get back to you. Like,
Okay, sure,
I don't
sure.
know, right? But I do, there are a few things that I do know from having worked through the data on this. One of the things that is in general for human thriving, and that we've seen in all of the data sets that we've come up with, and like the Harvard Human Flourishing Program and all the other different efforts out there to try to nail down what is it that really matters, right, for us to thrive in our lives.
Mhm.
One of the things our data has found is that whether you're thriving is far more correlated to how you treat other people than how you are treated. And it is a basically, it's entirely related in some ways to kindness. And I think many leaders don't recognize how much of an incubator for motivation, for connection, for emotional well-being, even physical well-being in their workplace or in their ministry or whatever it is that
Mhm.
they're doing. They don't realize how incubating a culture of kindness is absolutely essential for accomplishing the things that they're hoping to accomplish in the way that they're hoping to accomplish them.
So, in terms of connection and motivation, and emotional well-being, something as simple as kindness is
Yes,
critical. And I was
crucial.
wondering if you could just talk about that a little bit, because I know that's the topic of your book, and that I have used with some of my clients to great effect. So I'm
Oh,
wondering
good.
if you could share a little bit about that with
Sure.
us.
Yeah, I'll unpack it just a little bit. Basically, here's the basic thing that we have to wrestle with. The most important thing we have to wrestle with, whether we're a leader, no matter what it is that we're doing, whether it's personal life, workplace, whatever, is that pretty much almost everybody, maybe not 100%, but I'd say it's probably at least 90% of the population, probably 99%, really cares about kindness. Like that's a value for most people. Most of us would say, oh, overwhelmingly, it's incredibly important to be kind. One of the things that everybody talks about in our culture today is that we've lost kindness in
Right.
our culture and that that needs to be brought back. So there's no dispute about the importance of kindness. The problem is we already think we are kind. And, and it's so funny because like I will do events at churches or in community groups or universities. And one of the things that I can tell when I'm looking out at the audience and I'm talking about this, I'm looking at the faces
And who's
and I can
nudging?
tell that some that people are going, oh man, when I start talking about kindness, I can tell they're like, oh, I wish Jennifer were here. I wish Bill was here, right? Like the person that they're thinking they need this. I don't need this, but this other person needs this.
Okay.
And one of the things we have to grapple with is that essentially we value kindness, think we're kind, and we're basically deluded.
Okay.
We are not the people of kindness that we think we are.
Yeah.
And so the Kindness Challenge book, which is the one you're talking about,
Hmm.
it was based on a study, a big experiment that we did. We had 1,000 people in a study group doing all sorts of different experiments to try to figure out how do you actually become the person of kindness you already thought you were and you
Mm.
weren't.
Mhm.
And so we ended up creating, after all of that, something called the 30-day kindness challenge. And do you mind if I just
No, I'd love to have you
explain
share
this?
it. Yeah, thank
Okay,
you.
yeah, because it's a tool that literally can be used in any situation.
Yeah.
You pick someone that you are going to do the 30-day kindness challenge for. Now, we say to people, because whenever people hear this, they immediately start thinking of, oh my gosh, I need to do this for my spouse. I need to do this for my kid. I need to do this for my colleague, blah, blah, blah. Okay. And yes, absolutely, later. The first time that you do it, we found it completely dilutes the effort and what you're learning from it if you do it for more than one person. So
Okay.
just pick one
One. Okay.
and pick someone that you interact with fairly regularly. Like, again, you may want to do this for your mother-in-law, but if you only see her once every few weeks, it's not going to work. Okay.
Mhm.
So you pick that one person. So let's just say that it's a difficult colleague at work that you have to work with regularly, but somebody who slightly drives you nuts.
Mhm.
So you're going to do three things, the same three things every day for 30 days. And so here's what you do. And this is sort of basically a boot camp to get you aware of where you're not being kind
Mhm.
and train you in the new habit of actually true kindness.
Mhm.
So you're going to do these same three things. First is you don't say anything negative about that person for 30 days, every day for 30 days, nothing negative, either to them or about them to
Right.
somebody else, because that is often where we sabotage ourselves. Like
Right.
I had a colleague once where it was that kind of situation. Like I had to work very closely with this person. They drove me slightly crazy. They did not handle things well. I would be polite to them, but I would go behind the scenes to a colleague or to my husband and be like, you're not going to believe what happened today. And I don't realize it, but I am sabotaging how I feel about that person.
Mhm.
I'm creating neural pathways in the
Yep.
brain that
That's
are
what I was
going
just
in
gonna
the
say.
wrong directions. Yep.
Mhm.
So that's the first thing. Every day for 30 days, nothing negative. Now, let me just mention if you are a parent and you need to correct a child, or if you are a boss and and your subordinate turned in a bad work product, of course you have to be able to say, I asked for a 5-page report and this was 20. And, I can't bring this into leadership. So please go back and do this. Great. That's fine. It's just watch how you're doing it so that you're doing that in a kind tone. Okay. So that's the first thing. Nothing negative. Second thing, every day for 30 days is you find one thing that you can sincerely praise, that you can sincerely affirm about the person, and you tell them and you tell somebody else. So back to my former colleague situation, I I can't be like, "Ugh, you would not believe what they did," but I'm looking for things to praise. And so I notice that in this meeting, they actually handled a difficult situation with a lot of equilibrium and a lot of grace. And I go to them and I say after the meeting, Bill, thank you for handling that way. That would have driven me nuts. I'm so impressed you were able to keep your cool. I think we'll get a better client response from that.
Mhm.
You're genuinely saying that, and then you go behind the scenes and you tell someone else, like your boss or another colleague, guess what Bill did? This handled it so well. And now you're retraining those neural pathways. There's
Right.
a neuroscience principle. What you focus on is what you'll see.
Mhm.
And now you're going to start seeing things in that person that are actually really good and positive that you just kind of didn't notice or give credit for before.
Yeah.
Then the third thing, every day for 30 days is you do a small action of generosity or kindness for them. And, we think of acts of kindness as being like, okay, I'll bring my colleague a coffee after lunch. And yeah, absolutely. It could be acts of service. That's one of them.
Mhm.
But think broader. What's an action of generosity? And in this case, imagine that Bill comes by your office or your cube and is really excited about some numbers that just came in. And you're like, I've got a deadline. I'll be with you in an hour. Okay, maybe an action of generosity is actually taking your attention off of what you're doing and putting it on them right then when they're excited about it, not an hour later.
Mhm.
And, obviously, this is all dependent on what time you have and all the things, but that's just an example. That little thing is actually an action of generosity. And
Mhm.
so you do those three things for 30 days. What we found is that 89% of relationships improved, which is an enormous
Huge,
number in social
huge.
science, just enormous.
Mhm.
But if you think about it, it makes actually perfect sense that 89% of relationships might improve because the biggest thing you're doing is not just changing the temperature of the relationship, although you are. The biggest thing you're changing is you
Mhm. Mhm.
and your mindset and what you're noticing. And this is why it is so important as a boot camp for kindness.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. You're changing the neural pathways from going one direction to another direction. You're teaching the reticular activating system in your brain to look for
Yep.
something else,
Yep.
and then the other person kind of has no choice but to respond in kind, at least after a week or two, you would think. So,
Well, it often works that way, but it
not
is
always,
not 100%.
but it can still feel like it's a better relationship, I'm sure. You,
Oh,
just
well,
because you've changed the way you think about them.
absolutely.
Right,
And that it
right.
is it is one of these things where for me, I hate to say this out loud, it's kind of embarrassing, but I mean for me, honestly, as I started trying this myself during, one of the experimental phases, I spent the first, like, I didn't think I was negative and unkind, and I spent the first 2 or 3 days going, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. Like I had no idea how often I said something unkind or negative in an unkind or negative way. For
Mhm.
me, my big tripwire is irritation and exasperation.
Yeah.
I had no idea how often I was just slightly rolling my eyes which says to the person, you're an idiot,
Right,
which I
right,
would never want to say. So
right.
it's that kind of thing. It's just retraining yourself.
For sure, for sure. I love this so much. It's great to be able to share this with people. Thank you for going into that detail because I think they'll appreciate that. One other area I would love for us to just take a couple of minutes to talk about, if you can, is about burnout.
Mm.
My doctoral project was around helping leaders heal and prevent overwhelm, stress, and
Oh,
burnout.
wow. Yeah.
And so I would love to hear from your perspective anything that you can share that will help leaders flourish and not get either overwhelmed or overly stressed. I mean, we all need to deal with some stress. And in fact,
Yeah.
it's through some stress that we get accomplish
I
things.
was just going to say that.
Yeah.
Exactly. Like we
So,
all think that stress and anxiety is bad, and it's not necessarily. It's
not
how we
all of it,
handle it.
yeah.
Yeah,
But when
exactly.
we tip over into overwhelm and then eventually burnout, that's not helpful. I'm wondering if you have
No.
something to share
Well,
about that.
if you did your doctoral program on this, you're going to know way more than anything I could say. However, let me just say from the research that we've done,
Hmm.
one of the things, actually, let me flip it and talk to the leader who's a little skeptical.
Okay.
One of the things that is very clear is that we need to give, as leaders, more attention to burnout in our people than we do.
Fair.
That is, now we as leaders need to give attention to our burnout as well. And there needs to be, some actions that I can talk about in a second.
Hmm.
But I am actually have been noticing in some of the research we've been doing these last few years that there is a what's the right word? I guess kind of lip service a little to, of course, I wouldn't want my people to be burned out. We don't want them to be overwhelmed. We don't want the level of stress. And again, it's kind of like kindness. Like we agree, like mentally, logically, we know that's the case. But in practice, we are often not willing as leaders to do what we need to do in order to prevent burnout in our team. And so, in order for you to do that, that means that when people bring to you things, you have to respond in a very well thought through and a very gracious manner so that they know that you actually are welcoming that conversation rather than slightly irritated.
Mm.
This is a big deal. We could talk about this for hours. but but that's a big one. It's a very, very important one.
Yeah. So what you're saying is acknowledge them, let them know that you hear them, you see them, and that what they're sharing with you is important to you,
And that you welcome it.
and you
It's like,
welcome
no,
it.
I need to hear this. I'll
Right.
give you just a simple example from our own team fairly recently, actually, which is interesting, where I have a team of people. I have a staff and operations director who runs the team, basically. And the way that our business works is essentially our team are doing all the things I don't have to do to free me up to do the things that only I can do, like the research and the writing and the speaking and that kind of thing. And so the lead person, her name is Eileen, she was, I will forever be grateful to her, where she basically said during one of our regular meetings, at some point, you and I need to have a bit of a sit down with you to talk through a couple things. And that's never good. Like it's always like, what's coming next? It's
Yeah.
that feeling.
Yeah.
But she basically said, I don't think you realize how much you jump into whatever the latest opportunity is without figuring out what to take off our plates. And so everybody on the team, I have an amazing team of people, and everybody on the team will jump in, they will do it, they will do the fire drill, and the next one, and the next one, and the next one. And she said, I don't think you realize how close to burnout our team members are because
Okay.
we have created no margin.
Mm.
And so what came from that was me having to say, okay, so what do I do differently?
Hmm.
What does it look like? And it was, okay, this leader, me, I need to get some coaching. I need to figure out what it is that are gonna be priorities. And this is not a simple like, hey, let's make a couple of tweaks over the next couple of weeks and keep going. This is no, we need to fundamentally re-examine how we're doing priorities
Yeah.
in our business.
Yeah.
And so this is like probably in the end, I'm, looking ahead. We're already about a month and a half into this, but seeing where we are, by the time we rejigger things and get rid of projects we probably shouldn't have done and create a completely different process, it's probably a good 5, 6 month process.
Mm.
And they need to see that I am taking that seriously. I'm not just putting on a band-aid.
Hmm.
I'm willing to actually do that. And it's kind of challenging, to be honest, but
Yeah.
it it has to happen. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
That's a fabulous example, and really important for people to hear, that even the person who does all this research needs to step back once in a while and say, wait a minute, what am I doing here?
It's very embarrassing, but it's just
It's so
we're
human. I love it.
we're all human, right? Like the
That's,
key that I want people to hear, every leader to hear, is that your people need to know that you welcome, not just that you're okay with, not just when it comes up, no, that you welcome them coming to you with these kinds of things. And if they don't, and here's the hard part, I'm going to say something hard. If you don't hear those things from them, either you are a perfect leader and you make no mistakes in this area whatsoever, which is statistically a bit less likely,
Yeah.
or they are not bringing to you things you need to hear, in which
Right.
case you need to go to them and you need to
Right.
actually show that it's a safe conversation to have.
Right. That's terrific. That's terrific. That certainly will help everyone flourish more. As we wrap up, I'd love to know, when you think about flourishing leadership in tough times, which this is right now,
Hmm. Yeah.
what gives you hope, and what does that look like? In addition to welcoming and being kind,
Yeah.
is there something that you would like to share with people that we haven't talked about yet?
To be honest, I feel like the power of hope and showing people that change is possible is one of the secret weapons. Kindness is a secret weapon, and the other one is instilling hope that we can get through whatever it is that we're getting through. Now, I'm a person of faith. And so I think my hope isn't dependent on my ability to handle everything perfectly every day, right? Like I feel like God is still in control. Thank goodness.
Thank goodness.
Thank goodness. And so for me, it is, I mean, again, just me personally and me as a leader, it's pointing people to recognize and remember that.
That's great. Thank you for that wonderful closing word, which is so important for us in these difficult times.
Yeah.
So, Shaunti, how can people get a hold of you if they want to learn more?
The easiest way is just to go on Shaunti.com, which is our website. And I would encourage you all to sign up for our email list. We send
Yep.
out every week an equipping email to help people. And it's largely in personal relationships and
Yeah.
the personal space. But occasionally there is stuff that's explicitly leadership. But every leader is a person too. And
Absolutely.
every leader has their personal life and their mental health and their emotional well-being. And so we're trying to equip you and support you.
That's terrific. Thank you so much. And I recommend your books as well. They're terrific. So, thank
Oh,
you.
thanks. I
Thank
appreciate that.
Thank you so much, Shaunti, for being with me today. I really, I loved meeting you and hearing this from you face to face. So I appreciate this.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for joining me on Flourishing Leadership in Tough Times. If you found today's conversation meaningful, please like and share this episode and subscribe for more honest, inspiring stories to help you stay rooted with integrity, rise with courage, and lead with hopeful resilience. If you have thoughts or questions, or you're interested in finding out about coaching, spiritual direction, or retreat leadership, I'd love to hear from you. Please reach out through Substack or find my website at insideoutministries.info. I'm Deborah Owen, and I'll see you next time.